Fragile countries. Recording in progress. My name is Thomas Fulgrup. I'm the strategic lead of the GPA, the Global Platform for Action for Sustainable Energy in Displacement Settings, in short, GPA. This is a joint event together with our partners and friends from the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and Energy Peace Partners, EPP. This session is also part of the ministerial forums of the high-level dialogue on energy, which will happen in September. And during this week, many of you will know there are many different side events and official part of the programs. And we are really pleased to have quite a large gathering, a large interest for this side event. And we promise to present you a very lively and interesting session. Let me share screen and then I can go through the presentation of today very briefly. Here we are. Just a bit of housekeeping. As you've heard already, the meeting is recorded and will be shared afterwards. We have a Q&A session in Zoom. If you go down, you will find a Q&A button. Please use this for your question and comments. And if you want, you can also introduce yourself and your organization in the chat. The agenda for today has mainly two parts. After my introduction, we will have an intervention, an opening with a bit of background about fragile countries, about the energy situation in fragile countries, and the particular linkages between the peace, humanitarian, and stability in these countries, operations in these countries. And we will have an emphasis also on the displaced community. And if we talk about displaced communities, we mean displaced people, meaning refugees or internally displaced people, as well as their host communities. The second part of the meeting will be a panel discussion, and I'm really pleased about inviting or welcoming later a fantastic panel of 5 people. 5 people who represent the various actors in these fragile settings. And so we have a colleague from the from the countries we are talking about. We have a representative from the donor community. We have a colleague from the World Bank. We have a private sector company who is active in this space. And we have also the UN perspective. But we come back to this after our introduction of our background. And before handing over again, please do feel free to ask questions in the chat. The 3 colleagues will try to answer these questions after their presentation. We won't have time to have additional questions after the presentation because we want to spend as much time as possible with our dear panelists. And let me introduce the 3 fantastic colleagues we have been able to invite today. In the first part of the introduction, we will get a background on the work of Energy Peace Partners from Linda Wamune. She's the program director based in Nairobi. Then the next speaker will be Sarah Rosenberg-Janssen. She is with the GPA, our senior advisor, and the research lead, the lead for our research department. And then we have Phil Sandwell, who is at Imperial College and also a seconded part-time researcher for the GPA. And I would say, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Linda and invite all the 3 colleagues to turn on their videos and microphones, and then I will happy to guide you through the slides. Over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, as you have very well introduced me, my name is Linda Wamune. Speaking from Nairobi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I'm happy to take you through our work and share what we do as Energy Peace Partners. I'm the program director. To start us off, yeah. At EPP, we leverage climate and finance solutions to promote peace in fragile states, fragile countries, and these are countries that have been affected by, are at risk of conflict, often very energy poor, so they encounter a lot of energy poverty, and are climate vulnerable. On the spreadsheet, on the sheet we have shared here, these are the ones marked in red, and most of them happen to be in sub-Saharan Africa. Our work addresses the intersection, like I have said, of energy poverty, climate risk, and conflict risk and climate vulnerability. And we are working to demonstrate the value of promoting clean energy in these settings, because we know that access to energy opens doors to a number of, its benefits, looking at economic empowerment, encouraging peace and stability in these regions, making better livelihoods, and so forth. In terms of the interventions that we have, next slide, please. I'm going to focus on 3 key interventions. And the first one, we work to make the case for advancing renewable energy in these fragile areas. We do so by publishing pioneering research, which help to identify the entry points for renewable energy deployment in these countries. For example, with UN operations, we have published reports about the DRC, South Sudan, and launching today a report about Mali. And I would encourage you to visit our website to have a look at these publications. And through this research, we are also building a body of evidence that helps to demonstrate the transformational potential that renewable energy projects have in these regions. And we're also working to expand the peace building toolkit. The other way that we're helping to make the case for investment in renewable energy is through advocacy. And we are really advocating for system level change from fossil fuel, that is diesel, to renewables within UN missions. And we are happy that the UN earlier this year, like I think in 2019, they set a target to move all their missions and their operations to 80% renewables by the year 2030. Lastly, we are also working to measure impact, because we know that very few and there's very scattered data, and there's no solid body of evidence that exists which really measures the impact of renewable energy in these fragile settings. And we are working to create a new framework that will value and track the social and peace impacts of renewable energy. And this, we hope, will help to inform the broader sector, inform researchers and any potential investors in these regions. And we really want to help to promote and drive new renewable energy investment to these very high impact projects, which are often overlooked. The second intervention that we focus on is on what we call the Peace Renewable Energy Credit. Next slide, please. And this is an innovative financial solution which we launched. And the main purpose is we are helping to establish what we call a PREC market through monetization of energy attributes, renewable energy attributes. So a PREC, which in full stands for Peace Renewable Energy Credit, is simply an IREC, which is issued with a supplementary label that certifies the peace building core benefits. So this label is meant to be a high impact attribute that helps to drive additional financing and investment in these very fragile states through the monetization of the renewable energy attributes from these fragile countries. We are certified and issue PRECs from, so far we have been certified to issue PRECs from DRC and South Sudan. And in addition, we are almost, we actually have received communication that we have been accepted to issue PRECs from Chad and Somalia. As an example of what we have done with the PREX to date, the first ones were issued last year from the DRC in a project that has been carried out by a developer known as Nuru in the eastern part of the country. This is Goma specifically. And what's the value that they derived from those PREX was that they were able to install streetlights in a certain residential neighborhood, and this greatly improved security. And we have received feedback from residents of Ndosho, which was the neighborhood where this was done, and they're really happy with the streetlights that were installed. We have a number of other projects lined up from different countries, and really our aim is to advance this mechanism, this new mechanism of financing these projects through the monetization of the renewable energy attributes. Lastly, we have the third intervention that we are working on. We are calling it the PREC Aggregation Fund. And what this fund will do is it will provide developers in our target countries with additional upfront early stage equity through forward sale of PREX, which will help to unlock long-term financing. Access to finance is a huge obstacle that most developers usually face, and potential investors often overlook these fragile areas where we focus on. And our aim really is to aggregate these PREX that come from these areas and sell to investors and renewable energy buyers, most often large corporates. And we're expecting that this will be able to unlock up to 10% of upfront capex that is required by these developers. And by doing so, it will de-risk the projects and make them more attractive to other investors to come in and be able to, bridge that gap and meet this the financing requirement that is needed to have renewable energy projects deployed in these fragile areas. Currently, the idea is still being stress tested. We are part of the accelerator program at the Finance Lab, and we're hoping to launch later this year. The aim of the fund is to initially raise $10 to $20 million, which will be deployed in various projects. And we are expecting this initial amount to be able to unlock up to 10 times what we are putting in. So unlock about 100 to 200 million in financing for renewable energy projects to be deployed in these fragile areas. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Linda. I hope Thomas was going to introduce me, but I'm also happy to do it myself. Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Rosenberg-Janssen. I'm with the University of Oxford and also the GPA. And today I'd like to just offer a couple of really brief reflections on inclusivity and refugee-led collaborations. So if we go to the next slide, please. Great. So here you see a slide on definitions. And one of the things I'd sort of first like to raise is sort of what is inclusivity within humanitarian energy settings? And in the green box on the slide here, you see quite a basic definition that we have put together for sort of the information of the community and also to start discussions and debates on this topic. This work is based with my colleague Hajar Al-Kado at the University College Dublin and the HEED program at the University of Coventry. And together we've put together a short briefing paper on definitions within the humanitarian sector, including refugee-led and in inclusivity. So we can really define inclusivity and community-led approaches here as humanitarian energy policies and practices which are based on the needs and priorities of refugees and displaced people. And we may think that we are doing that naturally through all of our work, but for us that really means going beyond participation as a means of engagement to design programs and policies with substantive input from displaced people themselves, including approaches which use participatory methods, community co-design principles, inclusive planning tools, all these sorts of things. And if we go to the next slides, please. We can see that that can be a little bit difficult actually. As this diagram, sort of orange diagram here shows, Definitions really do matter. Often inclusivity is seen in rather a basic way as just including people, just inviting them to a focus group. But we really need to go far beyond that and start thinking about all the different methods where we can include displaced people and base our work on their views and their opinions and their suggestions on solutions. So if we go to the next slide, on slide 4, you'll see a slightly more complex diagram here with multiple colors, which really starts to talk about the need for conceptual planning, the need for involving displaced people within needs assessments, within context-specific discussions, and also within market-based solutions and job creation pieces. I think there's a lot to be said. We could talk for hours, I think, about co-creation and co-design and what these things really mean. But for me, what this diagram really starts to show is that displaced people need to be at the heart of sustainable energy solutions all throughout the program and policy cycle. I wanted to keep my comments very brief to leave time for Phil as well. So if we go to my last slide. We already heard Linda talk a little bit about research needs and evidence needs. And for those of you who are based more on the practitioner side on this call, you may be wondering, why do we talk so much about research in this space? And I think part of it is that we are a new community and humanitarian energy is a new sector. And there's really a lot of things that we don't know. For example, we don't have a global energy baseline for how much energy displaced people use or need. So if we don't even have this very basic baseline, then how can we really start talking about solutions? I think we'll hear more in a minute from Phil about the need for research and the types of policy work that can be done and that has been done. I wanted to just, before I finish, draw your attention to 2 things. One is that we have brought together some of these ideas on research in a sort of key research paper by myself and James Hayslip at UNEP DTU, which really starts to dig into some of these research issues and how research can contribute. So if there are researchers or people interested in research on the call, please do reach out to us at the GPA on that topic. And finally, I totally abused my last minute of time. The other panelists later get to do a call to action. And I thought I would also do a bit of a call to action here. The title of our panel today is Really Leaving No One Behind. And for me, really leaving no one behind requires that the humanitarian energy sector not just provide sustainable energy for displaced people, but with them. So I'd like to end on that note. And I'll hand back to Thomas and Phil for the next section. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah. Thanks, Linda. Hi, everyone. My name is Philip Sandwell. I'm from Imperial College London and the GPA Coordination Unit. And I'll be zooming out a little bit to talk about the interlinkages between energy and peaceful and inclusive societies. Next slide, please. Humanitarian response, sustainable development, and sustaining peace are 3 sides of the same triangle. That's what Antonio Guterres said when he took his oath of office for the UN Secretary General. And these 3 issues converge at what's called the triple nexus. This is where the humanitarian response, the SDGs, and peace building all overlap. And it's also where SDG 7, so sustainable energy, and SDG 16, peaceful and inclusive societies, also overlap. And it means we can use each to support the other. So for example, sustainable energy projects can be a focal point for opportunities for community development. And we can also use inclusive decision-making to help design long-term durable solutions with improved governance and hopefully share and distribute those benefits more equitably around communities. So how do we combine the SDG framework with these HDP objectives and ideally leave no one behind? Next slide, please. So where SDG 7 and SDG 16 overlap, we have overlapping challenges, but also overlapping opportunities for synergy. So for the challenges, firstly, humanitarian agencies typically lack the means to prioritize energy beyond meeting the most basic needs for displaced people. So that means they might be able to provide power for logistics and healthcare, but probably not wide-scale electricity access for households. Secondly, both the humanitarian response and peace operations are typically limited by short-term planning and budgetary horizons. So acknowledging that they both have very different mandates and they have different administrative and financial structures, they're both similarly limited typically by a 1-year planning horizon. And this makes it really difficult to consider renewable energy technologies, which typically have payback periods of longer than 1 year. Third, we risk perpetuating existing inequalities. So there could be existing tensions within or between groups and communities, for example, marginalized communities. And a new project could also form a scarce resource that could introduce conflict or that one group might exert disproportionate control over. But for the opportunities, there's been a number of intersectoral collaboration frameworks that have come online in the past few years. So a few examples are the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration and the Global Compact on Refugees. And these consider energy and environmental issues to a greater or lesser extent, but they do show the willingness of UN member states to tackle these kinds of issues in these kinds of contexts. There's also the New Way of Working, which encourages humanitarian responders and development agencies to work together as soon as practicable after a crisis to help develop long-term solutions. There's been a growing acknowledgement of the importance and really the value of private sector engagement in these kind of contexts too. The private sector can bring expertise and experience that quite frankly at the moment is lacking in these contexts. And they also allow new opportunities to explore new financing mechanisms to help overcome this one-year challenge. And finally, in terms of targets and data, as Sarah said, historically, this has been very scarce. Thankfully, the momentum is starting to shift and this is starting to change thanks to work from groups like the GPA and also SMAP at the World Bank. And there's been more explicit consideration of displacement situations within existing data collection activities and indicator frameworks. And this really helps us understand the scale of the challenge and know where we stand and ultimately what we need to do about it. Next slide, please. So with this in mind, we offer 4 key recommendations to support sustainable energy at the humanitarian development piece triple nexus. So firstly, as I said, data is a scarce but valuable resource. So we call for improved data collection to help design policies and programs that will help embed sustainable energy throughout the humanitarian and peace responses. We also call for better data sharing within and between organizations, and especially with the private sector. Energy solutions should cut across humanitarian development and peace objectives. So we should focus on how to embed sustainable energy within other areas of programming. Third, we need to have a conducive policy environment if we want to see change. So UN member states should implement the existing frameworks and help develop new ones. And organizations should embed clean energy into their targets and their climate action objectives, and ultimately their operations on the ground. And finally, organizations should make partnerships with the private sector, 1, feasible, and 2, desirable in order to operationalize. It can be really difficult to understand the complexities of the humanitarian system or the peace system. So we need to make it easier to integrate the private sector into these systems and help them develop the long-term solutions so we can bring in their expertise, bring in their experience, and bring in their access to financing, and hopefully scale up these solutions too. So with that, I'll close. I'd like to refer you to our policy brief on the interlinkages between energy and peaceful and inclusive societies. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll now hand back to Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Linda. Well done. And a little bit over time, but we managed to do the rest as well. Let's, without further ado, without going into any more details, I'd rather go to our dear panelists, and I would like to very briefly introduce them one by one, going from left to right, and invite them to turn on their video already, and before I give them the floor. So the first speaker will be Habib Magier. He's the Deputy Secretary General for the G7 Plus operation. He will introduce the G7 Plus from his perspective and the countries they're representing. So he's representing really these countries we are talking about today. Then we have Rutu Dave from SMAP, from the World Bank, who is behind many of these large-scale energy access programs in these countries. So she has sort of the policy overview as well as also the funding from the World Bank side. Then we have Hans-Olaf Ibreck, a key partner for greening peace operations as well as for greening humanitarian operations. Hans-Olaf is the climate envoy for the envoy for climate and security for the Norwegian MFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then we have Dina Ionesco from the International Organization for Migration. She's the head of Migration and Environment and Climate Change Division, a very close colleague to us. And we have, last but not least, and certainly very important, we heard this already a couple of times, a representative from the private sector. Welcome, Mats Hansen, CEO of Cube Energy, a Norwegian company. Over to you, Habib. Let's start with the countries we are talking about. So please tell us briefly, what is G7 Plus and what, from your perspective, are the key barriers in providing energy access in these countries we are talking about? And how can we address, of course, these barriers? Over to you, Habib.
Well, thank you so much, Thomas, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending wherever you are. Thank you for inviting us to this insightful panel discussion. By way of introduction, G7 Plus, in fact, with a small g, it's an intergovernmental organization of 20 conflict-affected fragile countries from Africa, Asia, Pacific, and Caribbean. Established in 2010, the group's collective objective is to achieve peace and stability through concerted advocacy and peer learning in the areas of peace building, state building, and economic resilience. Now, access to affordable energy is an assurance to resilience, an assurance to economic growth, and self-reliance, which are further indispensable factors for sustaining peace. And now, irrespective of any empirical evidence that I would not refer to, we, the citizens of conflict-affected countries, have lived this reality and this fact. Most of the conflict-affected fragile countries, such as those in the G7 Plus, are rich in renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind. Africa, Asia, and Pacific, where most of our members are located, have the highest solar and wind potential. Yemen, Afghanistan, and Timor-Leste, for example, are among the top countries with rich solar and wind sources. Now, however, of the 800 million people who lack access to energy, more than 85% live in fragile and conflict-affected countries. In fact, the countries that I just mentioned with the rich potential. Even those countries and regions that are considered to be connected to energy have intermittent access to power. That's not enough to be translated into economic and social growth. This has been among the major obstacles to economic and social resilience, and hence sustaining peace. Wars and conflict, of course, are among the main challenges that have paralyzed the institutions, the citizens, and everyone on every front. But the barriers to provision of access to energy that we can overcome are, number one, lack of investment in renewable energy and a narrow focus on conventional means, which are, of course, costly and are sometimes prone to risks. Despite the huge reduction in the cost of renewable energy over the past years, there has not been sustainable or substantial investment by donors, by private sector, and by governments in renewable sources such as solar and wind energy potential. And development partners have equally ignored this sector in their assistance. Number two, existing narratives and lack of sufficient data shy away the investors who are willing to invest in renewable energy production. This is coupled by weak institutional capacity to manage energy distribution, which is a common feature in the war-affected, conflict-affected countries. Now, considering the potential and the challenges, the G7 Plus and the Council of State Fragility, that is co-chaired by David Cameron, the former Prime Minister of United Kingdom, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former President of Liberia, and Mr. Donald Kabruka, who was the former head of the African Development Bank, launched a joint call for action to powering up energy investment in fragile states. This call that was launched in February this year, I can share the link to that, was signed by 16 current and former political leaders, including heads of states and governments, and more than 40 organizations, including UN agencies, private sector, think tanks, MFIs, and other organizations. The call to action is a pivotal milestone, I would say, in achieving the SDG 7 in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And in fact, it is a kind of a compact among donors, among the governments and the citizens on ensuring that there is no one left behind in access to energy. I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to further answer and discuss some of these challenges even in more detail, or some of these potentials in more detail throughout the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Habib. And I really can encourage the audience to read this call to action. It's very brief, but very concise, and it would be great if you could post the link to it in the chat. Thank you. Over to Rutu, and I introduced you already, Rutu. Please tell the audience a little bit what SMAP is and how you actually support these fragile countries with large-scale energy access programs. Over to you, Rutu.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for the kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this important session. Let me start off a little bit by introducing what SMAP is. It might not be as familiar to all the participants. So for those of you who might not be familiar with SMAP, it's a global knowledge and technical assistance program funded by donors and the World Bank, and it is administered by the World Bank. It provides analytical and advisory services to increase knowledge and institutional capacity to achieve environmentally sustainable energy solutions for poverty reduction and economic growth. Our business plan in SMAP for energy access is built around the urgent and intertwined needs of accelerating energy access efforts while making them also more inclusive. So the heart of leaving no one behind. Let me speak a little bit about data before I move into the window of leaving no one behind, because data is crucial to providing targeted and efficient solutions on the ground. So as per the SDG 7 tracking report, which is also the access side we are the custodians of the energy access component of the SDG 7 tracking report, which was released early this month. About half of the unelectrified populations resides in countries which suffer from fragility, conflict, and displacement. For this reason, we are particularly focusing our efforts in helping the World Bank design and implement energy access operations in fragile, conflict, and violent countries, in particular through distributed renewable energy solutions that have the potential to reach out to the underserved regions and populations. One vulnerable group that we target in particular are the displaced persons and the host communities. Similarly, you will be seeing an extra effort being taken place by our teams to revamp the multi-tier framework to ensure when we collect basic data that is then integrated into the consensus of the countries, that there is data that is collected for displaced persons, host communities, and the energy needs surrounding that. Moving on to the SMAP's Leaving No One Behind program, we work very much to provide safe, reliable, and affordable electricity for host communities and forcibly displaced populations. Over the past years, we have experienced, unfortunately, a dramatic increase in the number of displaced people, and developing nations, unfortunately, are also disproportionately affected and are carrying the overwhelming burden of this crisis. This has serious impacts, especially for the electricity sector, where large influxes of displaced persons can often threaten the sustainability of local infrastructure installations and cause the degradation of the energy services, which unfortunately can provide tension between the host communities and the displaced persons. The situation is often worsened by the limited availability of up-to-date data, and which is why we're focusing on data, and giving a limited picture to the local decision makers and international partners to come up with their solutions. As you will see, as a let me now put on my hat as the co-lead of the Working Group of Energy Access under the High-Level Dialogue report that we produce. We focus very much on the report, as we do in the World Bank's SMAP proposals, that both clean cooking and electricity initiatives must really be designed, as we do, on human needs, user preferences, and consumer affordability, very much in line with what was said by the earlier presentations in this session. People are centered to our energy approaches that we need to be putting forward. And we cannot afford for the full cost of energy access to be borne fully by displaced persons. We should see some kind of equitable financing structures come into play for this. Furthermore, I want to just end by saying that we need also a targeted focus on gender transformative strategies, which leverage the opportunities and instruments and new business models and solutions to enhance the inclusion of women, which unfortunately also are the brunt, if you would kind of unfortunately tier people in the displaced communities. They often bear the brunt of the work, the problem also. And so we need to come up with business solutions from an energy sector perspective that focus on women as beneficiaries, employees, and entrepreneurs that provide a solution, not only are stuck being at the receiving end. Let me end there, and thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Rutu, and thank you for bringing, in particular, this gender topic up. We had a similar side event yesterday where we talked about the consequences of COVID or the linkages between COVID response and energy. And also here, the gender topic is of extreme importance because the majority of operations are done on women and girls in these fragile settings. So thank you very much. And I can also, again, encourage the audience to read the report, the Energy Access Report. It's the #1 in HLDE, and rightly so, because it is actually very good. And thank you, Rutu, and your team for drafting this. Over to the donor perspective. Hans-Olaf, we heard a lot about the donors and the need for additional financing and all of this already. And from your perspective, and coming back to our key theme of leaving no one behind, what needs to be done to elevate the energy access programs and in these conflicted areas, and who should be also driving this? Is it more the donor side? Is it the international community? Is it the countries? Over to you, Hans-Olaf.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thanks to you and your colleagues for organizing this event. And also I would like to acknowledge your leadership, GPA's leadership on this issue, because you have actually been instrumental in putting the issue on our agenda. And I think that you deserve a lot of credit for this, because this is a really important topic that we all need to come together to address. I guess that over the last few days, we've heard quite often at the high-level dialogue that 2021 will be a make or break year for climate and energy action. So now it's it's time for us to roll up the sleeves and get going. So for me, it's also rather easy, but of course, the implementation will be quite challenging, but we have all committed to achieve SDG by 2030. So, and of course, the SDG says that we should provide energy services to all. So then, to me, failing is not an option. So we just need to focus and get going. Of course, this will be challenging given that we are now operating maybe the most difficult working environments and also the hardest to reach. But achieving SDG 7 actually depends on how we address this critical question. And based on the statistics that Rutu know a lot better than I do, but it seems like the goal might slip out of reach if we don't act immediately. So I think a clear call will be made out of the high-level dialogue to all of us to take action. So let me offer some suggestions how to take action, building on what Habib and Rutu said, and also building on the recommendation presented by Philip here. So I think for us at least, even though of course we as a donor, we have some capital, but our purse are, I would not say necessarily just limited, but it's not really big. So we need to unleash the large sources of capital. And of course, that's within private sector. And Mats, who I see on the screen there, will of course represent that perspective and provide some insight into their experiences. But for us, a key focus should be on unlocking private sector investments. And then, of course, we need to look at multi-year planning and budget cycles. I'm coming from what I call the long-term side of development cooperation. I'm not the short-term, that's my humanitarian colleagues. But we need to develop partnerships between us and match our planning and budget cycles better than we have managed to achieve so far. I think the partnership between Cube Energy and IOM, that I'm quite sure that Dina and Mats will present later on, it's a really good example of this. And the way I look upon this, it's a huge market opportunity if we are replacing, just to take the issue of diesel generators with renewable solutions. Thomas told me at an event we had last week, I think it was, within the humanitarian space, there's about 11,000 diesel generators. And within UN peacekeeping, there's another 10,000. So there's a market of a couple of those 20,000 diesel generators that we need to do something with. So Mats and colleagues, get going, and we will then see whatever we can support, provide whatever support we can to you. And then, of course, we need to, building on partly my previous remark, is also that we need to overcome silos and develop comprehensive solutions. That means that we need to ensure that we are providing the necessary capacity and the necessary expertise, because that's, of course, is limited in most fragile and displacement settings, and also within humanitarian agencies. I quite often said that humanitarian agencies also need to step up and allocate personnel to this important issue. It's not enough just to point at us as energy professionals. They also have to do the job. So we have the Norwegian supported NORCAP program that help to strengthen partners' capacity. And I know that GPA has extensive support from the NORCAP program. And I think that's an excellent vehicle that at least we are proud of. So, and we are also supporting the GPA, and both Thomas and Rutu also said that we need better data and advocacy. We need data to underpin whatever we are doing. That's key to for us to move forward. Let me then, towards the end there, briefly also address the energy in peacekeeping operations, since Norway is a non-permanent member of the Security Council as we speak, in 21 and 22, and we are then now trying actively to incorporate some of these issues that we are talking about, especially renewable energy, in peacekeeping mandates. And of course that is a challenge, but supplying missions with sufficient energy has become one of the key challenges of planners, because rising fuel transportation cost, the difficulty of providing fuel to remote bases, and the vulnerability of fuel supply by convoys warrants a sustained effort to address these challenges. So then sustainable and clean energy may help missions deliver benefits both inside as well as outside defense. It will improve efficiency, save money, reduce pollution. It will enhance security, and I think that is a key point that we need to hammer in with our colleagues. It will also help to maintain operational freedom, and it will also kickstart local access to energy or investments that benefiting local communities. And that's the issue of leaving something behind, and also reduce corruption while meeting their mandates. But in order to do so, we also need to ensure that mission budgets reflect their energy plans. We again need to simplify procurement practices to enable the use of renewable energy. And we need to encourage then troop and police contributing countries to share their best national practices. As I said, we are trying to strengthen mandates, but I have to say it's a challenge to get support from all the members of the council. And I think that as we speak, we're now negotiating the mandate for MINUSMA in Mali. So you'll see whether we are successful when that is being adopted by the Security Council. But that's also an indication. If you don't see it, then you know why it hasn't happened. So thank you very much. Over to you, Thomas.
Thanks, Hans Olaf, and thank you for not being only a very crucial finance partner in the energy space in humanitarian settings as well as in peacekeeping, but also for all your hard work behind the scenes. And this meeting today, for example, this whole advocacy piece around this topic is very important and very crucial. So thank you very much also for this. And I want to emphasize also one point, which is something close to us as well. We need actions now. We need this very soon, because Rutu can also talk about this at length. To develop these energy access programs, it just takes time. 2 years is easily gone when you develop a program for entire country. So if we are serious about achieving SC7 in the next 9.5 years, then tomorrow is the day to start. Tomorrow's the day to start. A good overview, a good direction to the UN, because the UN is already on the ground. Adina, your colleagues have the boots on the ground. They see the needs every day. And we already heard there is a sort of chronicle underfunding of the humanitarian system, and energy is not necessarily seen as the top priority, although of course we and in this panel here agree it is, or at least second tier. So how can we support your colleagues on the ground, and how do you support the people in need when it comes to energy access?
Yes, Thomas, thank you so much for this question and putting this as the boots on the ground of my colleagues. That's very correct. The organization has the boots on the ground. I sit in Geneva, so I feel humble and grateful to be able to speak on behalf of these actions being taken at policy level and on the ground. So it's very difficult, I must say. I think it's not an easy task, but I want to be nevertheless optimistic and positive for this event and overall. I think that we can say that over the past years, we made significant progress in the migration management sector and then in the humanitarian side to really, in fact, be more aware and recognize and advance on the role of energy. And this in both what we do and how we do it. So from IOM's example, I think we understood that we need a more systematic inclusion of this awareness about the role of energy and about finding solutions. And the first step has been the partnership. This has been said by our previous speakers, the partnership, I think, with the private sector, and then the partnership with also with the donors. And we are benefiting now also for working on innovative solutions and financing solution with the support from NORCAP that has just been mentioned before. We see that there is a difference. So we advance. I think that what we do, it means to provide access to clean energy to people that IOM serves. And how we do it, it means to really power all our facilities and operation in a more climate-friendly manner. So I have just a few examples just to go fast as we don't have so much time, and just to bring attention on what's happening on the ground. For instance, in terms of facilities and clean energy transition in our facilities, one interesting example, it's the first multi-year agreement with the Norwegian company Scatec to supply solar power to one of the, I think, the biggest humanitarian hubs in South Sudan, in Malakal. And we are also engaging in a partnership that I find extremely interesting and innovative to operationalize our solution with the Energy Peace partners to benefit from communities that are around the hub through the sale of peace renewable energy credits. I find this is an extraordinary example of how we are advancing. Then there is the programming side, where our energy transition has been really driven by our own water, sanitation, and hygiene programs, because we started to replace the diesel pump water supply systems with the solar power. So there are different examples of how this is going on. And then there's also work on addressing the cooking energy needs of communities. But also, I think very interesting, it's designed at facility level. It's all our facilities, in fact. So it's also, for instance, humanitarian, border posts, our management system. So it goes, in fact, like a cultural change throughout the system. So indeed, it takes time, but I think we see we see progress, and it's a connection also that's intellectual and cultural, and the vision that if you want to protect the planet and you need to serve the people who are affected by conflict and disasters and by climate change, we need this vision around energy. So it's about supporting the energy transition, I think, at a larger scale. That's our challenge now. We have good pilots, but how do we accelerate action? How do we raise the ambition? And so just to conclude, I think one key thing is about the data. This has been mentioned before. We also lack we need to collect better data on how we use the energy and how we use the energy data. And we are making progress, for instance, also in our displacement tracking matrix to have more standardized energy data tool, also in collaboration with NORCAP. And I think last thing to conclude, I would say, as for people, as for being a parent or being a colleague, being a manager, you need also in the UN to lead by the example. And so piloting this innovative solution, it's a first step. But once again, I think it's the large scale change that it's now key to us, and that goes through these partnerships, and the GPA, it's clearly at the heart of this action. So thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss and to give these examples.
Thanks, Dina. And let me really congratulate IOM for, first of all, doing a massive exercise on the data topic, including this in the displaced tracking metrics is really something that will help the whole sector moving forward. We heard this data topic coming up in all the interventions, and this is really crucial. And for the second part, I would also like to congratulate you, because IOM, for those of you who are not familiar with this project, and we hear about this in a minute, was the first UN agency who really developed a public-private partnership model with a company, and Mats will talk about this in a second, to replace the existing diesel-powered infrastructure in a large UN hub in Malakal in South Sudan. So I know this was really hard work. This goes into procurement, finance, and all kinds of deep dive details discussions with your colleagues. And I think everybody had to jump across a couple of hurdles to make this happen. So thank you very much, and congratulate you. Yes, Mats, we heard from all the other speakers, the private sector will solve it. Great. Looking forward to that. But you just need a little bit of framework and a little bit of capital, and then you can do it. Mats, please elaborate a little bit on this example with IOM, and then who's benefiting from your work in these examples, and maybe also from your perspective, what would you need to really make traction on a large scale?
No, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I agree with you that I think that the private sector does have a role to play, and I think there are a number of things that are working in our favor and that are making it easier for us to expand on these type of operations. So just to answer your question on an example of projects. For Cube Energy, we work mainly on two types of projects. So we have one type of project that we developed in partnership with Scatec Solar and IOM in Malakal, where we look at areas where there's a high concentration of humanitarian organizations that currently operate diesel generators. So this is, we look at these organizations in isolation, and sort of our goal is to replace the electricity being produced by diesel with a sort of a more efficient renewable energy solution. And what sort of makes that possible is that a lot of the humanitarian operations happen in areas where the conditions for producing or for generating electricity from solar is really good. And so there's a sort of a business case to be made by replacing these generators in the long term. And as Hans Olav said, you know, with 20,000 plus generators being operated by international organizations, there certainly is a market here. But before I go into the sort of the constraints that we feel, I thought I'd also mention a second type of project that we work on is, and we're hoping to start the first project in this line later this year in Somalia, is where we no longer look at the organizations in isolation, but we look at the organizations as sort of an anchor client in a bigger distributed network, where we, let's say the UN will initially take 70% of the electricity from a power plant, and the rest is then distributed to the affected population and the host community. So that's sort of a slightly different type of project, where sort of our need to liaise with the local government and with the local population is much greater, but where also sort of the impact is I think felt much more directly by the host community and the affected populations. But I think there are a number of challenges for us to scale up this. I think one is that for both type of scenarios, you have a great off-taker risk, which means that the predictability in the sales of electricity from these renewable energy assets that are installed to last for 25, 30 years, it's hard to sort of convince investors that there will be clients for these down the line. So I think for the type or the projects where we only sell electricity to international organizations and focus on them in isolation, I think that the work, for example, that the GPA has been doing on creating a guarantee mechanism, I think that holds a lot of promise, and I really hope that succeeds, because that can mitigate some of those risks. I think for the projects where we also distribute electricity to the host population and the affected populations, I think this is an area where I think the development actors might have a very big role to play. And I think there's two main aspects to that. I think the real key is to bring down the price of distribution. So taking part in investing in distribution mechanisms to the local population. And the second could be to look at ways of establishing partnership with local distributors. So I think for us as an international company, we will not have a big aim of having a huge footprint on the ground. And I think it would be fantastic to work with local companies that can take that distribution role. So I think helping with sort of due diligence and identifying these partners, but also potentially with providing guarantees, off-taker guarantees for local partners could be a really good way of bringing down those costs. And sort of another risk that is very present for us is sort of the time of developing projects. And for us, for the 5 years that we've been operating in this space, you know, some of these projects take a very long time to bring to conclusion. And I think for the GPA and sort of I know the efforts that you've put into addressing sort of and setting up standards that organizations can follow. I really think that's a very good way of speeding up that project development process. And so I think I'm very optimistic that that issue will be easier in the future.
Thank you, Mats, and thank you also for referring to our work, which you were also very instrumental in the past. And Mats was also very helpful to bring this private sector perspective to the UN, in a couple of workshops we conducted in the last year and a half to develop a framework to replace diesel-powered infrastructure in these settings. And I will ask my colleague Sadiq to post this blog about this work in the chat that everybody can have a look at. We are almost done, and allow me to overstep a little bit, like 3 minutes, because I wanted to really give the word back to the countries, to the fragile country perspective. Habib, does this, what you just heard, does it resonate with you, and where do you see the biggest potential here? And do you see a potential in these kind of public-private partnerships that Mats were just referring to? And for all the other panelists, if you could also think about your 30-second call to action, which I'll come back after Habib's short intervention.
Thank you, Thomas. First of all, the biggest potential, this as has been reflected by this panel, that is the biggest potential, the partnership among or across these partners, humanitarian, peace building, and donors, and the private sector and the government. I just would like to make 2 remarks. The first one, I think if we are willing to make the so-called triple nexus in action, energy or provision of energy is a good start to do, and it has, or it can show very tangible results. We heard some very good examples, and I think we can steer that partnership, and we can start it with some pilot projects and can roll it out. That's the first thing. But for that, we need to harmonize our aims and our objectives, which is obviously challenging, but not impossible. For example, one of the challenges with the humanitarian and peace building and also other actors is that they come there with a very short-sighted kind of like weave. For example, I'll give you a simple, just illustration that if you go to any camp, the peacekeepers camp, or in my case in Afghanistan, for example, if you would go to any military camp, you would see generators that would require huge amount of diesel, while you have a potential for solar. So if we turn that mentality into a little bit long-term shift, that would be good. The second thing, there is a huge potential for public-private partnership. I agree with you, and I agree with Matt. And I think the call to action is really an invitation for this week. And I would be really happy to speak to any of the actors, and of course to Matt on this, then how we can operationalize it. We have commitments from the governments. All we need is the DFIs. We need the World Bank Group to step in. For example, MEGA's investment in our countries is huge. It's very low as compared to other need guarantees, and the World Bank has to become, a little bit even bolder to step up its resources. And I would always use that, we all have to be much clearer to address the energy poverty in the fragile and conflict affected countries. So there is a huge potential if the donors, the private sector, and the IFIs and the humanitarians come together and take a little bit, get out of the comfort zone and really invest with the aim of achieving the SDG 7 in these countries. And I must say that one thing that it feels very bad when we look at globally. We have achieved, access to energy is one of the things that we have to be proud as human beings. But in fragile countries, it's very devastating. It's you get disappointed with that, and the need is very, very huge, but the investment that is required is very small due to the innovation. And finally, I would also like to request donors, for example, to facilitate peer learning. There has been a lot of innovations even within our own countries. For example, in Yemen. There are a lot of innovative cases that they could just facilitate funding that and sharing that experiences to inspire, maybe not to teach but to inspire other countries as well. Sorry for taking a little bit longer. Thank you.
Thanks, Habib, and thank you for your call to action. And again, instead of summarizing, I would really like to get also from the other four speakers, what is your 30-second pitch? What is your call to action for this topic? And then I will close up. And we start with Rutu.
Thanks, Thomas. And just wanted to say that the call for action, at least from my perspective, speaking as an individual, is very much that this is possible. We're seeing this in interventions that we have been taking place at the World Bank with our interventions in Yemen, in Bangladesh, Horn of Africa, Mozambique, Sahel. I could go on, the list can go on. But I think there is, and also at the bank, we have this dedicated resource from the IDA window for refugees and host communities, and and we're putting action in the ground on the ground with energy interventions coming in. So call to action, there is a will. We just need to kind of work with as many partners as possible to make the transformative change that really needs to happen on the ground. And we're looking forward to being part of the solution. So let me stop there in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. Hans-Olaf.
Thank you, Thomas. We know what to do. We know what works through the pilots that have been demonstrated. Now we have to scale them up and move beyond pilots. We have the technology, we have the means, we need to connect the dots and get to work, and we need leadership. Failure is not an option. Thank you.
Thank you. Dina.
Yes, for me, I think the word partnership might sound a bit simple, but I think it summarizes extremely well my call for action, because it means the partnership with the research community, with the political dimension of it, data, policy work. It's really concrete. And then it means also humanitarian development, migration, cross-cutting connections. And it's also the question of private, public, non-governmental, and the inclusiveness of people, the real people who are there. the communities, the migrants, the displaced. I call also for a positive way of looking at the people, that they are actors of the change themselves and can be part of the solution and can be empowered. And that's for me the strongest call. I believe so much on each individual contribution and then the partnership at collective level. So to conclude on the individual level, I just want to also to highlight that for IOM, we did, I think, a lot because of very committed people and wonderful partnerships. So it's in line with my call for action. So I can also thank you, Thomas, in person for all. And I can thank my colleague Eva Mach, who is brilliant and amazing. And one person can make such a difference. So imagine so many other people together, what a difference we can make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dina. And I heard a nice phrase yesterday, which said, power to empower. And I think that's coming back to your point of including the individuals. Last but not least, final word, Mats.
No, I think from our side, I mean, it very much builds on what Dina said, is that I think we see that there's so much learning still to be gained from each project that is being delivered on the ground. And at the moment, we're still looking for, you know, the good models for deploying these projects. And at this point, we're still, I think, dependent on people and on people taking a little bit of risk to get things done. And so sort of my appeal to the organizations and to donors is to sort of help sort of move and be flexible to get just a good number of projects off the ground, so that I think we're all learning so much from each system that is deployed. So that's my main appeal.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers. I will share screen again with some final links for everyone in the audience who is interested in looking at these topics more in details. You find the link from IOM, from EPP, and from our side. We also have a LinkedIn group for humanitarian energy experts if you want to join. Again, thank you very much to all the speakers, to all the panelists. Sorry for going 6 minutes over time, but I hope it was useful and fun for you. Thank you all and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.